Chapter 1, the $0 Statement. I've always been a person who values the precision of documentation. As a technical writer for a logistics firm, my entire professional existence is built on the premise that if something isn't recorded, it didn't happen. When I moved out of apartment 4C at the Heights, a luxury complex managed by Arthur Vance, I treated the move-out inspection like a forensic audit. I spent 48 hours cleaning. I used a high-powered vacuum on the baseboards. I steam-cleaned the grout in the bathroom until it looked like white marble again. I took 242 high-resolution photos, time-stamped and geotagged, covering every square inch of the 800-square-foot space. I even recorded a continuous 15-minute 4K video of the apartment, ending with me placing the keys on the counter and locking the door behind me. My security deposit was $2,400, $1 full month's rent. I expected to see it back in full, minus perhaps a nominal $50 fee for the professional rug shampooing required by the lease. Then, on day 21, the legal deadline for the return of deposits in this state, I received a thick envelope via regular mail. Inside was a statement of withholding. The balance was $0. I scanned the itemized list. $600 for total interior repainting due to excessive scuffing. $450 for professional deep clean of kitchen, oven, fridge. $850 for carpet replacement due to permanent staining. $500 for general administration and repair coordination. It was a work of fiction. A lazy, arrogant piece of creative writing designed to pocket my money. Arthur Vance didn't know who I was. He only knew me as the quiet guy in 4C who paid his rent 3 days early every month. He saw me as a passive revenue stream and now a parting gift. I didn't call him, I didn't scream. I didn't send an angry email full of exclamation points. Those are the tools of the emotional, and the emotional are easy to defeat. Instead, I sat at my desk, opened a fresh folder on my desktop labeled Vance Litigation, and began the process of gray rocking. I drafted a Level 1 warning. It was a formal notice of dispute. I kept it to 5 sentences. I stated that I had comprehensive photographic evidence of the apartment's condition upon exit, and that the charges were contested as normal wear and tear at best and fraudulent at worst. I stated that I expected the full $2,400 within 7 business days to avoid further action. I didn't attach the photos. Never show your hand in the first round. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. I tracked the delivery on my phone. When the notification delivered signed by A. Vance popped up, I felt the first click of the trap. 2 days later, I got a call. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail.
Elias, it's Arthur Vance. Look, buddy, I got your little letter. I think you're confused about how things work here. That carpet was trashed. My contractors don't lie. You're lucky I didn't bill you for the extra $200 it actually cost me to fix your mess. Don't waste my time with legal action. You'll lose, and I'll countersue you for my attorney's fees. Let's just call it even and move on, okay? Take care.
I listened to the message twice. He sounded bored, arrogant. He was so used to this routine that he wasn't even trying to hide the hubris. He thought the attorney's fees threat would scare me off. He didn't realize that in this state the law isn't a suggestion. It's a machine, and he had just handed me the handle to the lever. The hook was set. Vance had officially refused a good-faith attempt at resolution. Now I could begin the audit of his life. Chapter 2, the Statutory Deep Dive. The law is often viewed as a labyrinth, but if you have the right map, it's actually a production line. My map was the State Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, specifically Section 55-248, 15, 1, the Holy Grail of Security Deposit Statutes. I spent the weekend in the quietest corner of the county law library. While others were out at brunch, I was indexing every requirement a landlord must meet to legally withhold a cent. In my state, if a landlord manages more than 10 units, they are held to a professional standard. They cannot simply say a carpet is stained. They must provide a receipt from a third-party vendor and proof of the carpet's depreciated value. A 3-year-old carpet is worth less than a new one. Vance was charging me the full replacement cost for a carpet that had been there since I moved in 3 years ago. That was my first material violation. But then I found the nuclear button. Statute 55-248, 15. 2. The security deposit escrow requirement. It stated in no uncertain terms that security deposits must be held in a separate, interest-bearing escrow account in a federally insured depository. It also stated that the landlord must provide the name of the bank and the account number upon written request from the tenant. Failure to maintain these funds in a separate account, commingling them with personal or operating funds, is a violation of fiduciary duty. In many jurisdictions, commingling funds isn't just a civil error. If a landlord uses that money to pay their own mortgage or buy a jet ski, it's technically embezzlement. I felt a cold thrill. Arthur Vance didn't strike me as a man who cared about the fine print of escrow management. He struck me as a man who saw $120,000 in combined security deposits from his 50 tenants as his personal slush fund. I drafted my second letter. This one was even shorter than the first. Pursuant to Statute 55-248, 15. 2. Please provide the name of the financial institution and the specific escrow account number where my $2,400 security deposit was held during the duration of my tenancy. Please also provide a copy of the itemized interest accrued on said deposit. I sent it certified mail. The silence that followed was deafening. In the world of cold justice, silence is an admission of guilt. If Vance had the account, he would have sent the number to shut me up. The fact that he didn't respond meant one of two things. Either he didn't have the account, or he was so arrogant he thought he could ignore a statutory demand. While I waited for the legal clock to tick toward the failure to respond deadline, I started digging into the contractor who supposedly replaced my carpet. The invoice Vance had sent me was for V&B Property Services. I searched the State Corporation Commission database. No entry for V&B Property Services. I searched the local business license records. Nothing. I searched the address listed on the invoice. It was a UPS Store PO box. V&B stood for Vance and Brother. It wasn't a contractor. It was a paper entity. He was invoicing tenants for repairs that either weren't happening or were being done for pennies by a handyman, then pocketing the professional fee through a shell company. This wasn't just a dispute over $2,400 anymore. This was a multi-front fraud operation. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. Vance was a predator, but he was a sloppy one. He had spent years building a house of cards, convinced that no one would ever look at the foundation. I reached out to a contact on a local tenant rights forum. I needed to know if I was the only one. Within an hour, I had 3 names. Within 3 hours, I had 10. All of them had lost their deposits to V&B Property Services for carpet staining and scuffed walls. The ecosystem of corruption was coming into focus. Vance wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from everyone. Chapter 3, The Insider. Sarah Jenkins didn't look like a whistleblower. She looked like a woman who had been ground down by years of being the buffer between a narcissist and his victims. We met at a nondescript diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt and the booths offer enough privacy for a quiet conversation. I didn't lead with my problems. I led with hers. "I'm sorry he fired you, Sarah," I said. "From what I've heard, you were the only thing keeping that office from imploding." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound.
Keeping it from imploding? She asked. I was the one gluing the cracks. Arthur doesn't know the first thing about property management. He knows how to buy distressed buildings with predatory loans and how to squeeze the people inside them.
"I found your name through the forum," I said, placing my tablet on the table. I showed her the invoice from V&B Property Services. "Tell me about this company."
Sarah leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. V&B isn't a company, she said. It's a bank account. V is for Vance, B is for Barry, his brother. Barry is a drunk who couldn't swing a hammer if his life depended on it. Every time a tenant moves out, Arthur tells me to print a V&B invoice. He has a template. $600 for paint, $850 for carpet. It doesn't matter if the place is pristine or a dump. The numbers are always the same.
"And the work?" I asked. "Sometimes he hires a kid off Craigslist to do a landlord special, one coat of the cheapest white paint over the dirt," she replied. "Most of the time, Nothing. He just waits for the next person to move in and hopes they don't notice the scuffs. This was the rotten root. It was systemic, premeditated fraud. But I needed the nuclear option, the escrow funds. Sarah, where does the security deposit money go? I asked.
She took a long sip of her coffee, her eyes darting to the door. He doesn't have an escrow account, Elias, she said. I tried to tell him. I showed him the state requirements every year. He told me to shut up and do my job. He puts every deposit into his operating account, she continued. It's the same account he uses to pay the mortgage on his beach house in Outer Banks. It's the same account he uses to pay his brother's salary.
My heart rate didn't change, but my mind was racing through the implications. Commingling of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement. Do you have proof? I asked.
When he fired me, he forgot to revoke my access to the cloud storage for 48 hours, she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a silver thumb drive. I didn't steal his files. I just performed a final backup of the records I was responsible for. Including the ledger for the security deposit line item, she added. She slid the drive across the table. He's been doing this for 6 years. There's over $140,000 in withheld deposits in there. Most of it was used to cover his personal credit card debt in 2022.
This was it, the asset acquisition arc. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what I had. I had the complete financial history of a criminal enterprise disguised as a property management firm. Why are you giving me this, Sarah? I asked. Because he's going to do it to the next person, she said. And because when I asked for my final paycheck, he told me to sue him. He thinks he's untouchable because he's got a big house and a loud voice, she finished. I took the drive and tucked it into my inner jacket pocket. He's about to find out that the law is a very quiet, very sharp blade, I said. Chapter 4, Serving the Summons. The beauty of small claims court in our county is the discovery phase. While the trial itself is informal, the rules of evidence are not. Once a case is filed, you can serve the defendant with a request for production of documents. If they refuse or lie, the judge can award treble damages, 3 times the original amount for bad faith. I filed the suit, Thorne v. Vance Property Management, LLC. Total claim, $2,400 deposit plus $4,800 statutory penalties for bad faith withholding plus court costs. I didn't use the sheriff to serve the papers. I hired a private process server named Rick. Rick looked like a retired linebacker who specialized in the friendly delivery. He caught Vance on a Tuesday morning, right as he was walking into his favorite high-end coffee shop. "Arthur Vance?" Rick asked, holding a manila envelope. "Who's asking?" Vance sneered, adjusting his tailored blazer.
"You're served, buddy. Thorne sends his regards. Have a double espresso on him," Rick said. Rick told me Vance's face went from tanned orange to a sickly gray in 3 seconds.
He didn't even go inside. He grabbed the papers, got back in his Mercedes, and sped off. The clock was now ticking. Vance had 21 days to file an answer and respond to my request for production. In that request, I didn't ask for much. Just 3 things. 1, the original unedited photos of apartment 4C taken on the day of move-out. 2, the bank statements for the escrow account where my funds were held. And 3, the tax ID number and business license for V&B Property Services. I knew he didn't have them. I knew he would have to fabricate them or admit he was in violation of the law. A week later, I received a thick packet from a law firm, Sterling and Associates. Vance hadn't just answered, he'd hired a shark. The letter was designed to intimidate.
Mr. Thorne, our client denies all allegations. The charges for apartment 4C are legitimate and documented. Furthermore, your request for escrow information is irrelevant to the condition of the property. If you do not withdraw this frivolous suit within 48 hours, we will move for sanctions and seek $5,000 in legal fees for harassment. This was Newton's third law in action.
The antagonist was fighting back. He was trying to use the cost of a lawyer to bury me. He assumed that as a single tenant, I couldn't afford to fight a firm. He was right. I couldn't afford a long, drawn-out war with a law firm, but I didn't need to. I didn't need a lawyer to prove a bank account didn't exist. I just needed the paper trail. I drafted my response directly to Sterling and Associates. I didn't use any emotion. I didn't argue about the carpet. I simply cited the statute. Statute 55-248. 15. 2 is a strict liability statute, I wrote. The existence and maintenance of an escrow account is not irrelevant. It is a prerequisite for the legal withholding of any funds. Failure to produce the bank statements as requested will be noted in our motion for summary judgment on the grounds of commingling. Regarding V and B property services, I have already verified with the State Corporation Commission that no such entity exists. I suggest you advise your client on the penalties for perjury and mail fraud before he signs his next affidavit. I hit send. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I didn't answer.
Then came the text, "You think you're smart, Thorne. You have no idea who you're messing with. You're going to lose a lot more than $2,000 before this is over. Watch your back."
I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. I backed it up to 3 different cloud drives. Vance was cracking. He was moving from legal defense to criminal intimidation. Chapter 5, The Shadow on the Porch. The black SUV stayed for 3 nights. It was a classic intimidation tactic, subtle enough that the police wouldn't do anything, but overt enough to keep a normal person awake at night. But I'm not a normal person. I'm a technical writer. I analyze systems, and a man sitting in a car for 3 hours is just another data point. On the 4th night, the driver got out. He was a thick-necked guy in a tactical jacket, the kind of security Vance would hire from the fringes of the local underworld. He walked up to my porch and stood there, staring at my Ring camera. He didn't break anything. He didn't shout. He just stood there for 60 seconds, then spat on my welcome mat and walked away. I watched the footage on my phone. "Gray rock," I whispered to the empty room. I didn't call the police to report a scary man. That would result in a useless report. Instead, I called Rick, my process server. Rick had a side business in private security. "Rick, I need a wellness check on a vehicle," I said, giving him the plate number I'd captured from my high-def window cam.
An hour later, Rick called back. "Plate belongs to a Barry Vance," he said. "Arthur's brother, the B in V&B Property Services. He's got a record, Elias, mostly DUIs and a domestic, but he's a loose cannon. You want me to sit outside your place?"
"No," I said. "I want you to help me set up a recording." I knew the cycle. Vance was a narcissist. When the lawyer didn't scare me, he sent the brother. When the brother didn't scare me, he would come himself. He couldn't help it. He needed to see the fear in my eyes to feel like he was still in control. I waited. 2 days later at 6:00 p.m., a silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Arthur Vance stepped out. He wasn't wearing his blazer this time. He was in a golf shirt, looking like a man who had just come from a frustrating round. I stepped out onto the porch before he could knock. I had my phone in my shirt pocket, lens facing out. Recording in 4K, I also had a secondary digital recorder hidden in a potted plant.
"Elias," he said, his voice forcedly calm. "We need to talk man to man without the lawyers." I stood perfectly still. My hands were at my sides. My face was a mask of neutral indifference.
"I have nothing to say outside of the court process, Arthur," I replied. "Look, you're making this a lot bigger than it needs to be," he said, stepping closer. He was trying to use his height to loom over me.
"I'm a busy man," he continued. "I don't have time for small claims nonsense. I'll give you $1,200 right now, cash. We sign a paper saying this is over and you walk away."
The deposit was $2,400, I said. The statutory penalty for bad faith is triple that. $7,200, plus my filing fees. Vance's mask slipped.
The friendly neighbor vanished, replaced by a snarling, entitled predator. "You arrogant little prick," he hissed. "You think because you read a few laws you're a genius." "I own this town," he continued. "I have judges on my payroll. You think Sarah's little thumb drive is going to save you? I'll have her for theft before you can even open a file." He stepped into my personal space, his finger stabbing at my chest. "You drop this suit, or I will make sure you never rent an apartment in this state again. I'll put you on every blacklist."
"I'll sue you for defamation until you're living in a tent. Do you understand me?" He finished. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Are you finished, Arthur?" "Am I what?" he asked. "Are you finished with your verbal assault and criminal intimidation?" I asked. because I've recorded every word, including your admission that you know about the Sarah evidence. I hadn't mentioned that to your lawyers yet, I added. Thank you for confirming you're aware of the records you tried to hide. Vance froze. He looked at my shirt pocket. He saw the tiny green light of the camera. He turned a shade of purple I didn't think was biologically possible. He didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, stumbled to his Mercedes, and tore out of the driveway, clipping my trash can on the way out. Chapter 6, The Gable Connection. The revelation from Marcus Vane changed the geometry of the battlefield. It was no longer a simple case of a landlord stealing a security deposit. It was a map of a localized corruption ecosystem. The woman in the Mercedes was Brenda Gable. Her husband, Tom Gable, was the lead building inspector for the county. Suddenly, the luxury status of the Heights and the fact that Vance's other crumbling properties never seemed to fail an inspection made perfect, sickening sense. Vance provided the lifestyle, Gable provided the rubber stamp. I didn't go to the local police. In a town where the building inspector is on the take, the local precinct is often just the next stop on the payroll. Instead, I activated Module A, the corruption ecosystem. I needed a multi-vector attack. First, the professional front. I drafted a formal complaint to the State Board of Housing and Community Development. I didn't mention the mistress or the affair. I focused on the data. I cross-referenced the maintenance logs Sarah had provided with the official county inspection reports. I found 42 instances where Tom Gable had signed off on pass ratings for HVAC systems that, according to Vance's internal ledger, hadn't been serviced in 5 years. Second, the social front. I didn't post on Facebook. I didn't go to the local news. I contacted the state auditor's office. I framed it as a misallocation of county resources. I provided the evidence of the V&B Property Services, shell company, and suggested that county inspections were being bypassed to facilitate a tax evasion scheme involving fraudulent repair invoices. The third front was the financial front. I knew Vance was over-leveraged. Sarah's drive showed that he was robbing Peter to pay Paul, using new security deposits to pay the interest on the high-interest loans he used to buy his latest distressed property. If I could freeze even one of his revenue streams, the whole machine would seize up. I spent Tuesday night at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts. I wasn't looking for a gotcha moment. I was looking for a pattern. I found it in the habitability certificates. Every time a tenant moved into a Vance property, a certificate was issued, and every single one was signed by Gable. I sent a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request to the county for Tom Gable's official travel logs and vehicle GPS data. If he was in Brenda's Mercedes during working hours, the county's own records would prove it. The next morning, I received a phone call. Not from a lawyer, not from Vance, it was a blocked number. Mr. Thorne, a gravelly voice said, it was Tom Gable.
I think you've got your nose in places it doesn't belong, Gable said. There are a lot of ways for a new apartment to become uninhabitable overnight. Mold, electrical fires, things happen. It would be a shame if your new place had a sudden, catastrophic failure.
Are you calling as a public official, Mr. Gable? I asked, my voice flat, my recorder already spinning. I'm calling as a friend, he replied. Stop the FOIA request. Drop the Vance suit.
We can make the V&B charges go away and maybe even find you a nice consulting fee for your trouble, Gable finished. I don't take consulting fees from shell companies, I said, and I don't negotiate with building inspectors who use their wives as couriers for kickbacks.
The line went dead. I didn't feel fear. I felt the weight of the binding evidence, variable increasing. Gable had just confirmed the conspiracy. He had just moved from a silent accomplice to an active co-conspirator. I emailed the recording of the call to the state auditor and the FBI's regional field office for public corruption. I didn't add a subject line. I just labeled the file, Gable Vance Extortion 01, MP3. The spring was being compressed, and Arthur Vance was still trying to push back against it, unaware that the harder he pushed, the more devastating the release would be. Chapter 7, The Motion to Suppress. They pulled my meter at 10:15 a.m. By 10:45 a.m., I was in the lobby of the utility company with a printed copy of the state's Utilities Protection Act and a recording of my conversation with Tom Gable. Vance was using his control idle to pull strings at the municipal level. It was a classic move for a local tyrant, but I had prepared for this. I didn't argue with the clerk. I asked for the compliance officer and the risk management department. My power was disconnected without notice by an employee using a county vehicle. I told the compliance officer. The lead building inspector threatened me with a catastrophic failure 30 minutes prior. Here is the recording. If my power is not restored within the hour, my next call is to the state attorney general regarding the tortious interference and civil rights violations by your department. My power was back on by noon, but the victory was short-lived. That afternoon, Marcus Vane called me with news from the legal front. Elias, Sterling, and Associates just filed a massive omnibus motion, he said. They're moving to suppress the porch video, the Sarah Jenkins files, and they've filed a protective order to block your FOIA requests, Marcus continued. On what grounds? I asked. The video, they're claiming a reasonable expectation of privacy, because the porch is technically part of the private dwelling, and you baited him into a confrontation, Marcus replied. The Sarah Jenkins files, they're claiming they are trade secrets and were obtained through electronic trespass. They're even threatening to have Sarah arrested for felony data theft, he finished. This was Module B, Newton's third law. Vance wasn't just defending, he was trying to strip my arsenal before we even got to court. What about the Mistress Building inspector evidence? I asked. They're calling it scandalous and impertinent and moving to have it stricken from the record, Marcus said. Elias, they're throwing everything at the wall. If the judge is a Vance friend, we might lose the Jenkins files. And without those, we're back to just your $2,400, he added. I sat in the dark of my newly powered-on living room. I needed to pivot. If the insider data was blocked as a trade secret, I needed to find a public vector that proved the same thing. I went back to the V&B Property Services invoices. I looked at the mailing addresses. I looked at the dates. Every single invoice had been sent via the United States Postal Service. In the U.S., using the mail to facilitate a fraud is a federal felony under 18 U.S.C. Section 1341. It doesn't matter if the company is a shell or if the repairs were real. If you use the mail to collect money based on a fraudulent representation, you are committing mail fraud. I didn't need Sarah's thumb drive to prove mail fraud. I just needed the invoices Vance had sent me and the public record that V&B didn't exist. The Jenkins files were the how, but the invoices were the what. I drafted a request for judicial notice. I asked the court to take notice of the fact that V&B Property Services was not a registered business in the state. I didn't need discovery for that. I just needed a screenshot from the Secretary of State's website. Then I did something Vance didn't expect. I called the local postmaster. I'd like to report a mail fraud scheme involving fraudulent invoices and a fake business entity, I said. People forget that the Postal Inspection Service is one of the oldest and most aggressive law enforcement agencies in the country. They don't care about local politics. They don't care about building inspectors. They care about the integrity of the mail. I spent the next 4 hours preparing a postal fraud package. I included every invoice I'd received, every one Sarah had shared with the forum, and the recording of Vance admitting he owns the town. As I licked the stamps for the package, Marcus called back. The judge just set the hearing for the motion to suppress, Marcus said. It's next Thursday. And Elias? The judge is Judge Miller. He's the one whose campaign Vance helped fund last year. Good, I replied. Good, Elias, he's going to gut our case, Marcus warned. No, I said, the gray rock in my soul hardening. He's going to try to gut the case on the record. And when he does, he'll be doing it right as the federal postal inspectors are opening a file on the man who funded him. He's not going to save Vance. He's going to realize that Vance is a sinking ship, and he's not going to want to be on the deck when it goes under. Chapter 8, The Trump Card. The GPS stickers were a rookie mistake. They were meant to be a psychological siege tactic, a way to tell me we know where you are. But in the world of evidence, they were a gift. I didn't remove them. I didn't call the police. I drove straight to a licensed private investigator Rick recommended, a guy named Sully who specialized in electronic countermeasures. They're passive tags, Sully said, peeling one off with a pair of tweezers.
Low range, he continued. Whoever is tracking you has to be within 200 yards to ping them. It's a follow me kit. Can you trace the receiver? I asked. I can do better. I can spoof the signal, Sully replied.
For the next 3 days, my car spent 8 hours a day parked in front of the federal building and the local FBI field office. If Vance was tracking me, I wanted him to see me spending every waking hour with the feds. While my electronic ghost was haunting the FBI, I was working on the trump card. I had been focusing on the $850 for the carpet replacement. I decided to track down the actual carpet. Vance's Heights complex was large, 50 units. He couldn't replace a whole carpet without a dumpster, and dumpsters require waste management receipts. I used Sarah's ledger to find the trash and removal line item for the month I moved out. There was no charge for a carpet disposal, but there was a $50 charge to a company called Quick Patch Pro. I called Quick Patch Pro. "Hi, I'm calling from Vance Property Management," I said. "We're doing an internal audit on apartment 4C, I continued. "I see a $50 charge for a carpet repair back in June. Can you send over the work order?" The guy on the other end didn't even hesitate. "Oh yeah, I remember that one," he replied. "Just a small cigarette burned by the radiator, 5-minute job. We just took a scrap from the closet and patched it in." "Why?" "Just verifying the scope of work," I said. "Did you replace the whole carpet?" "Are you kidding?" the guy asked. "Arthur would never pay for that. He told me to make it look good enough for the next sucker and build it as a repair." This was it. The material violation was now quantifiable. Charge to tenant, $850. Actual cost to landlord, $50. Fraud margin, $800, but I needed the final piece of the corruption ecosystem. I needed to know why Gable signed off on the habitability of that apartment if it had a trashed carpet. I went back to the FOIA logs I'd managed to secure before the protective order was filed. I looked at the building permit history for V&B Property Services. V&B hadn't just been doing repairs. They had been doing structural improvements on Vance's new acquisitions, and Tom Gable was the only inspector signing off on them. I found a permit for a basement renovation in a building Vance had bought 6 months ago. The permit was for a single-family residence, but I drove by the property. It was a 6-unit apartment conversion. Vance was turning houses into illegal multi-unit fire traps. He was bypassing the commercial multi-unit fire codes by filing them as residential. This saved him tens of thousands in sprinkler systems and fire exits, and Gable was letting him do it. This wasn't just mail fraud or security deposit theft anymore. This was a public safety hazard. If a fire broke out in one of those buildings, people would die. And the paper trail led directly to Arthur Vance's desk and Tom Gable's signature. I called Marcus. "Forget the security deposit," I said. "We're filing a motion for immediate injunctive relief on the grounds of imminent public peril. We're going to force a court-ordered inspection of his entire portfolio by a state fire marshal, not a county inspector." "Elias, that's nuclear," Marcus whispered. "You'll destroy his entire business model." "The business model is built on the corpses of his tenants," I said. "It's time to burn the house down legally." Chapter 9, The Hearing. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old paper. Judge Miller sat on the bench, his face a neutral mask that I knew hid a decade of favors for men like Arthur Vance. Vance's lawyer, Sterling, stood up with the confidence of a man who had already won. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's case is a house of cards built on illegally obtained evidence and character assassination," Sterling said.
We moved to suppress the Jenkins files as stolen trade secrets and the porch video as a violation of our client's privacy, he continued. "Without these, there is no case." Judge Miller looked at Marcus. "Counsel," he asked.
Marcus stood up. "Your Honor, the Jenkins files are evidence of a crime, commingling of funds and embezzlement," he said. "Under the crime-fraud exception, trade secret protection does not apply." As for the video, Mr. Vance was in a public-facing area of a multi-unit complex. Marcus continued. There is no expectation of privacy when you are threatening a tenant on their own doorstep.
The judge sighed. I'm inclined to agree with the defense on the Jenkins files for now, Miller said. The chain of custody is questionable. As for the video, I'll take it under advisement. But Mr. Thorne, your request for judicial notice regarding V&B Property Services, Miller asked, it's irrelevant to the condition of the apartment. Vance smirked. He thought he had won.
He thought the system had protected him. I stood up. Your Honor, if I may, I asked. I'm appearing pro se as the primary witness. Proceed, Mr. Thorne. Miller frowned. The defense claims the V&B invoices are legitimate, I said. I'd like to present Plaintiff's Exhibit G. It is a sworn affidavit from Quick Patch Pro. It states that the carpet in apartment 4C was repaired for $50. Mr. Vance charged me $850 for a full replacement performed by V&B. I finished. Vance's smile faltered. I'd also like to present Exhibit H, I continued. It is a copy of a Federal Postal Inspection Service target letter addressed to Arthur Vance, I said. It was delivered this morning. It concerns the use of the mail to collect fraudulent debts through the V&B shell company. The courtroom went silent. Even Sterling looked pale. A target letter from the feds is the legal equivalent of a heart attack. And finally, I said, I'd like to present the metadata from the photos Mr. Vance provided. The photos he claims show the damage I left behind, I added. I pulled up the images on the courtroom projector. Look at the bottom right corner of the raw files, Your Honor. The date taken is July 14th, I pointed out. I moved out on June 30th. These photos were taken after a new tenant had already moved in and after the handyman had tracked mud across the floor while fixing the radiator. I looked at Vance. His hubris was gone. He looked small. He looked trapped. Mr. Vance didn't just withhold my deposit, I told the judge. He fabricated evidence to justify a theft and used a shell company to launder the profit. And he used his relationship with the building inspector to ensure no one ever checked his work, I added. This isn't a landlord-tenant dispute. This is a criminal enterprise.
Judge Miller looked at the target letter. Then he looked at Vance. He knew the wind had changed. If he protected Vance now, he was tying himself to a federal investigation. Mr. Sterling, Miller said. Do you have a rebuttal for the metadata? Miller asked, his voice dripping with sudden, sharp disdain. Sterling stammered, we would need to verify. Verify what? Miller asked. That your client lied to this court. He slammed his gavel. Motion to suppress is denied. I'm referring this entire file to the district attorney for an investigation into perjury and tampering with evidence. He looked at me. Mr. Thorne, Miller said, you asked for treble damages. I'm awarding you the full $7,200 plus attorney's fees. But I suspect that's the least of Mr. Vance's worries today.
As we walked out of the courtroom, Vance tried to lunge toward me. You ruined me, he screamed. You think you're so smart, I'll kill you. He was tackled by 2 court bailiffs before he could reach me.
I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just adjusted my glasses and looked at the bailiffs. Make sure you record the assault for the record, officers, I said. It'll help with the restraining order. Chapter 10, The Nuclear Option. The fallout was a slow-motion car crash that lasted 6 months. Once the security deposit thread was pulled, the entire tapestry of Arthur Vance's life unraveled. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division moved with the precision of a surgical team. Using Sarah's ledgers as a roadmap of fraud, they discovered that Vance had been skimming roughly $250,000 a year. The nuclear option was fully activated. Tom Gable, the building inspector, was the first to fall. When the state fire marshal conducted the inspections I had requested, they found 112 life safety violations. Gable was fired within 48 hours and eventually indicted for bribery and official misconduct. To save himself from a 10-year sentence, he flipped on Vance. Vance's bank, seeing the federal investigation, called in his loans. He couldn't pay. The Heights and his other 49 buildings went into receivership, but the most satisfying part wasn't the big numbers, it was the social front. I organized the Heights Restoration Group. We used my $7,200 settlement to hire a class action firm. We reached out to every tenant who had lived in a Vance property over the last 6 years. Vance was hit with a $1.2 million class action judgment for systematic security deposit fraud. Because he had commingled the funds, the court pierced the corporate veil. This meant his personal assets, the beach house, the Merceds, his personal savings, were all seized to pay the victims. I sat in my new apartment and watched the news. Local property mogul Arthur Vance sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for mail fraud and tax evasion. The headline read. The footage showed Vance being led out of the federal courthouse. He wasn't wearing a tailored blazer anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked old. He looked broken. His brother Barry was right behind him, facing charges for the V&B invoices. Sarah Jenkins got the last laugh, too. As the whistleblower, she received a 15% cut of the back taxes the IRS recovered from Vance, a check for nearly $80,000. She used it to start her own ethical property management firm. Marcus Vane became the most sought-after tenant rights lawyer in the state. As for me, I didn't celebrate with a party. I spent the evening doing what I do best, documenting. I wrote a final case summary and posted it to the Tenant Rights Forum where it all began. I didn't focus on the revenge. I focused on the process. I included the statutes, the templates for the FOIA requests, and the guide on how to check metadata on landlord photos. I received a message an hour later from a kid in a different city. My landlord is trying to keep my $500 for dust, the kid wrote. I just sent your level 1 warning template. He just replied saying he made a mistake and is sending the check. Thank you. I closed my laptop. The cold justice equation was balanced. Injustice, negative $2,400. Restitution, positive $7,200. Systemic cleanup, priceless. I stood up, walked to my balcony, and looked out at the city. The lights were bright, the streets were quiet, and for the first time in a year, the system was working exactly the way it was supposed to. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, went inside, and locked the door. I didn't need to record anything tonight. The record was finally complete. The Cold Justice Protocol, a masterclass in systemic warfare. The confrontation between Elias Thorne and Arthur Vance is more than a story of a stolen security deposit. It is a clinical demonstration of how a single, competent individual can dismantle a corrupt power structure using the very rules designed to protect it. This analysis breaks down the strategies, mindsets, and technical maneuvers that transformed a $2,400 civil dispute into a federal criminal case and a total systemic collapse. Section 1, the anatomy of a collapse. The conflict began with a common injustice, a landlord withholding a security deposit for normal wear and tear. Most tenants walk away or settle for half. Elias Thorne, a technical writer, chose a different path. By applying the Trident expansion engine, Elias identified that if Vance was willing to lie about a carpet, he was likely lying to the IRS, the state, and his other tenants. The escalation followed 3 distinct phases. 1. The forensic audit. Elias utilized high-resolution documentation and metadata to prove Vance's invoices were fraudulent. 2. The multi-vector attack. He triggered concurrent investigations from the Postal Inspection Service, the State Board, and eventually the IRS. 3. The systemic finish. By exposing the corruption of the local building inspector, Elias removed Vance's shield, forcing the legal system to either crush Vance or be implicated in his downfall. Section 2, the educational core, methods and mindsets. 1. The gray rock operational mindset. The primary reason Elias Thorne won was his refusal to engage emotionally. In Western litigation, the person who screams first usually loses. The lesson, treat the antagonist as a data source, not a person. By remaining neutral, Elias baited Vance into overreaching. Method, never answer a phone call from an antagonist. Force all communication into a written, time-stamped format like email or certified mail. 2. The power of binding evidence. Vance's downfall was sealed not by what was in the photos he provided, but by what was hidden inside the files. The lesson, Digital footprints are permanent. Elias used the EXIF metadata of Vance's photos to prove they were taken after the legal deadline and after a new tenant had moved in. Method: always document the process of documentation. A photo of a clean room is good. A photo with a timestamp, GPS coordinates, and a judicial notice of the date is an unshakable weapon. 3. The regulatory lever. Elias realized that he didn't have the money to outlitigate a millionaire landlord. Instead, he became a whistleblower for the state and federal governments. The lesson: federal agencies like the IRS, postal inspectors, and the FBI are the ultimate enforcers. They have infinite budgets and a mandate to protect the system. Method: shift the conflict from me versus him to the government versus him. If you can prove an antagonist is defrauding the state will do the fighting for you. 4. Strategic withholding. During the discovery phase, Elias knew about the Sarah Jenkins files long before he revealed them. The lesson: information is most powerful when used to catch an antagonist in a lie under oath. Method: let the antagonist sign a sworn affidavit. Only then do you present the evidence that proves the lie. This turns a civil mistake into a criminal perjury charge. Section 3. Actionable values for the reader. Competence over drama. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You need to be accurate. Know the statutes. The law is a set of if-then statements. If the landlord does X, then the penalty is Y. Read the handbook. It's the manual for your weapon. Documentation is a shield. In any dispute, the person with the most organized paper trail almost always wins. Leverage the hubris. Arrogant people believe the rules don't apply to them. This belief makes them sloppy. Don't stop them from being sloppy. Record it. Final takeaway: Arthur Vance didn't lose because Elias was lucky. He lost because he encountered a man who understood that the system is a machine. If you know where the levers are and you have the patience to pull them, justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable.